Hello, thank you for joining today's webinar on the next generation asset management, which also will include some data points from a recent survey on that subject. My name is Mike Schmidt, and I will be the host for this webinar. Mark Gatos, Nlight's Chief Marketing Officer, will discuss some of those more interesting data points from the survey to help you get a perspective on where your peers are going with asset management programs in their organizations. We want to respect your time, so we'll keep this webinar under 30 minutes. We encourage your questions. Type them into the chat box and we will answer them at the end. Should we not get to all of the questions, we will follow up with any unanswered personally. On to you, Mark.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar titled Results of the 2019 Technology Asset Management Survey, conducted by Sapio Research. My name is Mark Gatos. I'm Chief Marketing Officer here at Nlight Software. I'd like to thank you for the time you're going to be spending with us. We tend to keep a pretty quick webinar, keep the information to time ratio pretty high, so we'll move pretty quickly through these slides. If you have any questions, please feel free to submit them to chat and we'll try to get to them later. First off, a little bit about Nlight Software. We're actually a dedicated software company. We've been in business since 2004. We literally have hundreds of customers worldwide. We'll show you some of those in an upcoming slide. And we're on the 10th generation of our product. We really help organizations from the very beginning to help manage their infrastructure, whether that infrastructure is in their data center, co-location facilities, edge, in their corporate offices, wherever that infrastructure is, we help organizations manage it. And we have companies using our software throughout the world, and some are small to hyperscale companies you'd be very familiar with. And we pride ourselves on being very easy to do business with. And as a result of having great technology that provides value and having a focus on being easy to do business with, we have an unprecedented 98% customer retention rate. And here's a partial list of some of the companies who do use Nlight Software to help manage some or all of their computing infrastructure. As you can see, they come from a wide variety of industries, from financial services, healthcare, consumer technologies, utilities, telecom. They come from a broad swath worldwide across many different verticals. But what they all have in common is they use Nlight really to increase the efficiency, to automate workflows and processes, to improve compliance. These organizations, and this is obviously a sample of those customers, they all have one thing in common. They use Nlight software to help manage that infrastructure and really increase the automation and efficiency of how they manage that computing infrastructure. Nlight solutions fall into two main suites of applications. The first is our data center infrastructure management solutions, often referred to as DSIM. And then on the other side, we have our technology asset management solutions, sometimes referred to as TAM. And really, both sets of these solutions, as I mentioned earlier, are really designed to help organizations automate how they manage their computing infrastructure, really to increase agility, achieve greater efficiency, to increase the cost effectiveness of how they manage their entire technology stack. And the real focus here, again, is to help organizations increase the efficiency, increase the automation, and how they manage that computing infrastructure, whether that's in the data center, whether it's in a co-location, an edge facility, or outside of any of those facilities within the corporation, in the extended enterprise. But ultimately, people don't buy software. They don't buy Nlight software, our solutions, or anybody else's solutions just for the purpose of buying software. Organizations are trying to solve problems, and what we find is that the issues that customers typically are addressing fall into sort of these main categories. There may be a few more, but these are the main ones that organizations use Nlight software for. First is for what we refer to as data center infrastructure management, to really increase the effectiveness of how they manage their assets within the data center or in a co-location or edge facility. We also get used for technology asset management. Today we'll be talking a lot about that, so I'll move quickly off of that, but again, one of the main sort of solution areas where Nlight software gets deployed. Some organizations use Nlight software for what's referred to as asset integrity management, to make sure that if there are any changes occurring with their physical assets, they become aware of it, so that if there are any unknown changes or unexpected changes occurring with their infrastructure, they get notified, and then they can explore what's going on. Was this a planned change, unplanned change, or even perhaps a malicious change? We often get used for compliance. The Nlight software is frequently used in compliance situations to make sure that organizations are monitoring the assets they have, monitoring the changes, being able to respond to audits and know exactly where their assets are, who's touching those assets, what changes are being made, and so forth. Nlight is also used for what's referred to as the U.S. Federal Data Center Optimization Initiative, which is abbreviated DCOI. And it's there to help increase the efficiency of how federal agencies are using their computing infrastructure. We get used for workload service management to really track the workloads and where they're being used, the effectiveness, how much it costs to maintain those workloads, really prevent potential outages or bad performance. So again, some organizations use us for workload service management. And lastly, we are often used for co-location management. Many co-location facilities use Nlight to manage power, to provide portals so organizations can expose to their customers how much energy they're using, how much capacity they've used, and so forth. And additionally, some organizations actually use us to enable them to add additional services to co-location, so that those co-location services can offer asset management, either for the organization to do their own managing with the software, or to provide a managed service themselves that the customer uses the software, and then the services are performed by the actual co-location organization. So these are just some sort of the main areas where Nlight gets used from a solution perspective. Today we're going to be, as I mentioned before, focusing on the technology asset management space. So as I mentioned before, Nlight has sort of two main solution suites: data center infrastructure management and technology asset management. And each of these solution suites is made up of very specific applications. As you can see, we have Nlight Asset Optimizer, Nlight Energy Optimizer, Nlight System Utilization Monitoring, and Asset Explorer for data center infrastructure management. And those are sort of the main applications. I'm not going to go into too much detail around our data center infrastructure management suite. But today we're going to be focusing on technology asset management. We'll be talking about mainly from a solution perspective on the Nlight side, Asset Explorer. And we'll get into this after we talk about the results of the SAP EO Research. And underneath all of this, Nlight has a machine learning solution which is built on top of IBM Watson IoT that helps organizations perform machine learning across all of this. But as I mentioned today, we're going to talk about technology asset management. So let's drop down one level and talk specifically about TAM. So at Nlight Software, when we talk about technology asset management, or TAM, we're referring how to an organization sort of manages all their assets, not just IT assets like laptops and desktops and servers and switches, but it's also other devices they might have in the organization, IoT devices, medical devices. So looking at all the devices and really looking at it from a source of truth for all those assets, constantly monitoring what assets are on the network and coming onto the network, understanding the asset dependency, software, hardware, network, firmware, anything to do with those assets, discovering new assets and monitoring changes to those assets, sending alerts to personnel if there are changes that are unexpected, or there are assets that weren't unknown of or appeared on the network that weren't expected, and really help addressing business and security issues by integrating with those business and security systems. So again, you're trying to solve specific problems, and technology asset management typically integrates with either the business systems, the ITSM systems, security systems, and really creating tailored reporting and dashboards and providing an audit trail of what's going on with all the assets you have on your network, whether they're constantly on the network or sporadically on the network. So technology asset management is really about providing this sort of 360 view of all devices, all assets across your extended enterprise, from the data center to the corporation to the edge to even those additional devices which typically may not be found inside or managed by the IT organization. So now let's jump into the SAP EO Research report. So first, before we drop into the results of the report, let's sort of talk about the results of the research that was done by Sapio. First off, it was a technology asset management global survey that was commissioned by Nlight Software, and it was targeted at individuals with titles of the sort of C-suite, director, managers, vice president. So sort of a broad set of individuals from a title perspective. And the responsibility went across asset management, business unit, compliance, security, finance, IT. So a lot of different individuals looking at really asset management from a variety of different perspectives. And it was across many different industries. So the survey ended up going across a variety of different industries. And so additionally, it was not only at those titles, but it was done across, just from a specific perspective. The survey was performed across 3 countries, which was the United States, United Kingdom, and France. And there were 1,516 respondents that made up the results of the Sapio research. So again, 1,516 respondents across US, the United Kingdom, and France. So one of the first results of the Sapio research showed that there's actually quite a big disconnect between the C-level and those who are sort of operating, functionally performing the tasks day to day within organizations. So there's sort of this confusion in the ranks. 82% of the C-suite think that assets are scanned and audited hourly or daily or weekly. Yet the truth is 50% of both the compliance and security teams say it is more like a monthly or quarterly basis. So think of that differential. The C-suite thinks it's happening more frequently, while greater than 50% of the compliance and security teams think that it's occurring on a monthly or at maybe even a quarterly basis. And then 78% of all respondents admit that 20% of assets are actually not detected on the network. And so I think the C-suite has no idea that things aren't being scanned as frequently as they think, and that 20% of the assets just are completely invisible to the folks that are supposed to be managing those assets. So what this ends up doing is really creating financial waste, because there's this disconnect and there's a great deal of misinformation going on. There are potential cyber vulnerabilities occurring because there are all these assets that are not being maintained. And overall, there's a greater inefficiency because organizations are not managing these assets as tightly as the C-suite thinks, but as tightly as they could be. So a lot of challenges created by this disconnect. The second major finding from the Sapio research report was a lot of organizations just have financial waste, either in the form of software licenses purchased or time they have to spend performing audits that are more costly and more challenging because they don't have the information they need. So what they found is that 40% of the finance teams indicate they spend more than 100 hours when they are audited. So more than 100 plus man hours are spent performing an audit, often because they don't necessarily have the information at their fingertips. And that 90% of business units indicated that they had increased license costs and fines that they were not expecting to have. And another thing we find is that there's just a general over-provisioning and unused assets that organizations have. So 70% of IT organizations indicate they buy more than they need just in case, to make sure that they're not over subscribing the number of licenses that they've actually purchased. And that 20% indicate that they have unused licenses, which is sort of interesting. There's sort of this differential, but 20% that they've unused or overbought their hardware or software licenses. So in general, over provisioning, having unused licenses, or just generally overbuying is a common thing. And this is ultimately just financial waste at not having a strong grasp of the assets you have. So one of the big results of the Sapio research is just the fact there is still a lot of cyber vulnerability out there with devices and assets. And a lot of it has to do with unknown assets or unpatched assets. So 41% of IT teams say that only 80% of their devices are regularly connected to the network. So they have these devices that aren't connected, then all of a sudden they do connect, and who knows what they could be potentially bringing with them. And according to security teams, in 27% of organizations, they're not even reporting assets on a monthly basis. It's less than monthly. So this ends up being a challenge if you're trying to get your arms around what actually is going on with those assets. 42% of IT teams report less than 60% are not proactively managed, meaning not on the network, not scheduled. They have inactive agents, so they're just not being monitored. And then security and asset managers agree that 70% or more devices on the network do not actually have the latest current patches, which is just amazing from the survey results indicating that many don't actually have patches. And 88% of asset managers claim they have no audit trail on security patch management. So as you can see from the results from the survey, there's a lot of cyber vulnerability out there in the technology and asset management space. And the last issue we wanted to highlight, sort of comes from multiple points within the survey, is that ultimately, if you're working with old data or bad data, it just creates overall inefficiencies and is extremely labor intensive. You think of all the business systems that depend on asset information. ERP, DSIM, ITSM, the CMDBs, software asset management, ITAM, they all depend on current information, accurate information. So when this information gets out of sync, you get inefficient workflows, you get disparate systems that are out of sync that really lead to unnecessary redundant work, or people having to sleuth, well, where are those systems? Where did they go? Who do they belong to? And so what we saw was that 66% of organizations saw 10% waste of time in business operations due to manual processes, and that 70% of organizations saw that they had a 10% or more waste of time in the audits due to these same manual processes. And that 66% of organizations say they could spend IT budgets more efficiently if they had proper data and they had the proper information so that they would spend less time on these particular tasks. So overall, when the data is bad, when it's inefficient, when the data is bad, it just creates inefficiencies across the entire organization, anybody that's dependent on asset information. So this is a sort of a macro concept that came out of the Sapio survey. So one of the macro things that was identified by the Sapio research and survey is that 43% of organizations actually do not see asset management as one of their top 5 priorities. So as a result, you end up with all these challenges which are listed on the left-hand side. I'm not going to go through all of them, but you can see there's a great deal of challenges. And if you want a solution that will address all those challenges, ultimately you need to find a solution, and Nlight provides a solution in this case, which gets a wider set of assets, can go deeper into those particular assets, and that adds a faster ROI. And I'm not going to go into that today. I'm not going to talk about this. We've had previous webinars if you'd like to have more information about Nlight Asset Explorer, but we provide a wider a solution that goes wider, finds more assets across more protocols, can go deeper into those assets, whether those are switches, servers, laptops, or other types of devices. And we ultimately provide this at a lower cost by providing a faster ROI, not just a lower cost to acquire the solution, but actually on an ongoing basis. And if you're going to address those challenges on the left-hand side, and you want to make asset management a top priority, you want a solution that goes wider, deeper, and provides a faster return on investment. So we would strongly urge you, those were just sort of the highlights of the Sapio survey, but we would strongly urge you, if you'd like to read more, there are a variety of different other insights that the Sapio Research report and survey captured from those 1,500 or so respondents. So we'd strongly urge you to check out the rest of the survey. These were just sort of the highlights. We also have a booklet called 7 Pitfalls of Technology Asset Management you can find on the Nlight site. We're sort of highlighting the 7 pitfalls here, but if you want to read more detail there, you can find out more by going to the Nlight site and looking under resources. So that wraps it up for the webinar. We'll get to the Q&A in just a second, but there's a variety of different resources you can find. We've highlighted the Sapio Research and the 7 pitfalls of technology asset management. You can find those on Nlight, but there are a variety of other resources you can find on Nlight.com, such as a recently released IT Asset Management for Dummies, or a variety of videos or use cases around technology asset management. So again, thanks for your time on the webinar. Let's turn it over and see what questions we might have got during the webinar.
Thanks, Mark, for the facts and the interesting observation on asset management challenges. Please remember to ask your questions by using the chat box. We have several queuing up. Those that we don't get to today will personally follow up with you shortly. From James, we have a system that tells us what we have. Isn't Nlight Discovery redundant?
That's a great question, James. Ultimately, why would you want to use Nlight versus some other type of discovery solution? Ultimately, it gets down to what I mentioned before, is that the Nlight solution can go wider and get more assets, find assets you didn't even know you had on network, and can get a deeper exploration and interrogation into those assets, firmware, software, other types of information. And additionally, we can do that with a lower cost of total ownership, lower total cost of ownership than any other solution out there. So again, it's sort of the wider set of assets, a deeper exploration into those assets with a much better total cost of ownership. So that's why organizations will turn to Nlight to capture that information, to turn to the Nlight Asset Explorer to solve that problem. As we saw in this whole webinar, in the Sapio Research, finding assets is a big issue for a lot of organizations, and being able to find that information consistently and finding the assets that are not currently being managed. So I hope that gave you an answer, James. Thanks for the question.
Madhu asks, we have a CMDB that we get all of our asset information from. Why do I need Nlight?
Thanks for the question, Madhu. Many times, a lot of the information you get out of a technology asset management system like Nlight Asset Explorer, you would feed into a CMDB. So although CMDBs typically house a lot of this information or some of it, they usually don't have all of it, and they don't necessarily go find that. And a lot of times CMDBs are just out of sync with what's actually going on in an organization. So if you're counting on that to be the system of record, that gets to be a real challenge. What you want to do is have some automated way that you're feeding that information into the CMDB, so you're keeping that constantly updated with whatever information the CMDB has. You may want additional information outside of the CMDB, but that really depends on what you want in the CMDB and what out, depending on your organization's needs. So I hope that gave you the answer you were looking for.
This question is from Jesse. How is it you can find more assets than anyone else?
That's a great question, Jesse. So how do we find more assets than other discovery solutions? Well, there's a lot to that. It's really The solution is really very vendor agnostic. It's protocol agnostic. It's device agnostic. So, if we can reach an asset and it can be explored or interrogated, we can get access to it. And a lot of other types of discovery type solutions are very limited in terms of what they find. So, really, without going into too much technical detail, if it can be found, if it can be seen, we can find it. So, while other solutions typically have limitations, without spending too much time on this, really we just have a very focused solution that allows us to find more assets than other discovery solutions out there and really explore and interrogate it to get more information out of those systems. And again, we're not limited to ITC assets or servers or switches. We can actually reach out, as we do with some of our customers, to medical devices, IoT devices, and so forth. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Mark, and thank all of you for your questions. That is all the time we have for today. Please feel free to contact us at any time at info@nlight.com for more information or to get a demo. We have several useful articles, white papers, and ebooks to help you and your management get your arms around the many facets of asset management. Please check them out on Nlight's website. Thank you and have a good day.